The Crucible was the largest structure Commander Elena Vasquez had ever seen. It floated in the darkness of space like a metal moon, spinning slowly above a purple planet. Millions of lights blinked across its surface. Ships of every shape and size moved around it like insects around a lamp. Elena stood at the window of the prison transport, her hands bound in front of her. She was a small woman with dark hair and brown skin. Her uniform was torn and dirty from the arrest 3 days ago, but her eyes were calm. She had been in worse situations before. "Human," said the guard behind her. The creature was tall and thin, with gray skin and 6 eyes arranged in a circle on its face. "We arrive soon. The Concorde waits." Elena nodded but said nothing. She had learned that silence often worked better than words with these aliens. They expected her to beg or cry. She would do neither. The transport entered the Crucible through a massive gate. Inside, Elena saw thousands of aliens moving through wide corridors. Some walked on 2 legs like her. Others crawled, floated, or moved in ways she could not describe. All of them stopped to stare at her as the guards led her through. She heard whispers in languages she did not understand. But some aliens had translators, and their words reached her ears clearly. "That is the human. So small, so fragile. The Vornkai will tear it apart in seconds." Elena kept walking. Let them talk. Let them believe what they wanted to believe. The guards brought her to a massive circular room. It was filled with seats that rose up like a stadium, and every seat held an alien. At the center of the room was a raised platform where several important-looking creatures sat behind a curved table. This was the Galactic Concorde, the ruling body of 200 spacefaring species, and standing before them, waiting for her, were the Vornkai. Elena felt her heart beat faster when she saw them. The Vornkai were monsters. There was no other word for them. They stood 8 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms and skin like dark red leather. Their faces had no nose, just 2 slits for breathing. Their mouths were filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh. Their 4 eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. There were 3 of them, but one stood in front. He was larger than the others, covered in scars that told stories of countless battles. This was Kethmaros, the Death Singer. Elena had read about him during her journey here. He had killed champions from 30 different species. He had never lost. The leader of the Concorde, a creature that looked like a floating jellyfish made of light, spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Commander Elena Vasquez of Earth, you stand accused of trespassing in sacred Vornkai hunting grounds. Your ship entered their territory without permission. This is a crime punishable by death under galactic law." Elena stepped forward. "My ship was damaged. We had no choice but to enter their space to make repairs. We meant no disrespect." The Vornkai leader made a sound like grinding stones. "Disrespect was given. Disrespect must be answered. We demand blood justice." The jellyfish creature pulsed with soft light. "The Vornkai have made their demand clear. Humanity must either surrender their colony on Kepler 402b or send a champion to face a Vornkai warrior in ritual combat." Elena heard gasps from the audience. She understood why. Kepler 442b was humanity's first colony outside the solar system. 50,000 people lived there. Children had been born there. It was humanity's future. She could not let it be taken. "I will fight," she said. The room went silent. Then laughter broke out from dozens of alien throats. The sound was strange and horrible. Clicks and whistles and roars mixing together. Ambassador Telesivri of the Quelith Dominion leaned forward in his seat. He was a creature with smooth blue skin and long tendrils instead of hair. His species was known for their intelligence and their cruelty. He studied Elena with eyes that held no warmth. "You," he said, "a human. Your species has no claws, no venom, no natural armor. You are among the weakest creatures ever to reach the stars. What makes you think you can fight a Vornkai?" Elena met his gaze without fear. "I did not say I would win. I said I would fight." More laughter. But some aliens had stopped laughing. They watched Elena with something like curiosity. Kethmaros stepped forward. He towered over her, his 4 arms crossed over his massive chest. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough. "I accept this challenge. It will bring me no honor to kill something so weak. but I will make your death quick, human. That is the only mercy I can offer." The Concord leader pulsed again. "The combat will take place in 1 hour. Commander Vasquez, you may choose your weapons from our armory. Blades, energy weapons, projectile weapons, chemical weapons, anything you desire." Elena looked at the weapon rack that was brought before her. It held swords of glowing metal, guns that hummed with power, and devices she could not even identify. Any of them would give her a better chance than fighting empty-handed. She pushed the rack away. "No weapons," she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the aliens who had been whispering stopped. Every eye, every sensor, every organ of sight in that massive room focused on her. Telesivri's tendrils twitched in confusion. "You refuse weapons? Against a Vornkai? That is suicide, human." "Maybe," Elena said, "but that is my choice." Kethmaros studied her with his 4 yellow eyes. For a moment something flickered across his face. Not fear. The Vornkai did not feel fear. But perhaps it was the first small seed of doubt. "You are either very brave or very stupid," he said. Elena smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "My people have a saying, sometimes the bravest thing and the stupidest thing are the same thing." The Concord leader announced that the combat would begin in 1 hour. Elena was taken to a small room to prepare. She had no armor to put on, no weapons to sharpen. She simply sat on the floor, closed her eyes and remembered. She remembered the streets of Sao Paulo where she grew up. She remembered the prison camp where she spent 3 years during the war in Europa. She remembered every scar, every broken bone, every moment when death had been close enough to touch. She remembered surviving. The door opened. It was time. Elena stood up and walked toward the arena. She could hear the crowd roaring behind the walls. Millions of aliens had come to watch her die. They were going to see something very different. The arena was a circle of white sand surrounded by walls of black metal. Above those walls, seats rose up and up until they disappeared into darkness. Every seat was filled. Millions of aliens had come to watch the fight, and millions more watched through screens across the galaxy. Elena walked through the gate and felt the heat of spotlights on her skin. The crowd made sounds she could not describe. Some cheered, some laughed, some made noises that might have been prayers to gods she would never know. She was barefoot. She had removed her boots and her jacket, leaving only her simple gray undershirt and pants. Her arms were bare, showing the scars that covered her brown skin. Old scars. New scars. Burns and cuts and marks left by things that had tried to kill her. Every scar was a story of survival. In the stands, Ambassador Telosivri watched with cold interest. His assistant, a smaller Quelith with nervous movements, was entering data into a device. "What are the odds?" Telosivri asked. 300 to 1 against the human, the assistant replied. "No one believes she will survive longer than 30 seconds. "Put 10,000 credits on her death," Telosivri said. "Easy money." Nearby, the insectoid Chirix ambassador shifted uncomfortably on his seat. His species had compound eyes that saw in many directions at once. He had been studying humans for decades, and something about them had always bothered him. He could not explain what it was. They were weak, they were slow, they died easily, and yet his ancestors had written warnings about creatures like humans. Creatures that did not fit the normal rules of the universe. "You seem troubled," said the Morveth ambassador beside him. The Morveth was a water dweller, sitting in a tank of blue liquid. Her voice came through a speaker on the tank's surface. "I am," the Chirix admitted. "I do not think this fight will go the way everyone expects." The Morveth made a bubbling sound that meant disbelief. "A human against a Vornkai death singer? The human has no chance. I see no reason to watch this slaughter." She pressed a button, and her tank began to move toward the exit. The Chirix watched her go, then turned his many eyes back to the arena. He would stay. He needed to see what happened. On the other side of the arena, Kethmaros entered through a gate decorated with the bones of his past victims. The crowd erupted in cheers. The Vornkai were feared throughout the galaxy, and Kethmaros was the most feared of them all. He walked to the center of the arena and looked at his opponent. The human female was so small, her head barely reached his chest. Her arms were thin sticks compared to his 4 powerful limbs. He could see her ribs moving as she breathed. He could see the pulse of blood in her neck. This would not be a fight. This would be an execution. But still, something about her bothered him. It was her eyes. They were dark brown, almost black, and they held no fear. Every creature he had ever faced had shown fear at some point. Even the bravest warriors had a moment of doubt when they saw him. This human had none. Why? A voice echoed through the arena, explaining the rules. The fight would continue until one fighter was dead or surrendered. There would be no breaks, no rest, no mercy. The winner would have their species' honor restored. The loser would have nothing. Elena listened to the rules and remembered. She remembered being 12 years old, hiding in the ruins of her apartment building while soldiers searched for survivors. She remembered holding her breath for so long that her lungs burned, staying perfectly still while Boots walked past her hiding spot. She remembered the prison camp on Europa, 3 years of cold and hunger and pain, 3 years of watching friends die, 3 years of refusing to break, no matter what they did to her. She remembered the guard who had told her she would never leave that place alive. She remembered the look on his face when she walked out the gates as a free woman. Humans did not survive by being strong. They survived by refusing to die. The horn sounded. The fight had begun. Kethmaros charged. His forearms spread wide, each one ending in claws that could cut through metal. His mouth opened in a roar that shook the arena walls. He moved faster than anything his size should be able to move. The crowd held its breath. This was the moment. This was when the human would die. Elena watched him come. Time seemed to slow down. She saw every detail of his attack, the angle of his arms, the position of his feet, the way his weight shifted as he ran. She had fought men twice her size in the streets of São Paulo. She had fought guards in the prison camp who had armor and weapons when she had nothing. She had learned that size and strength meant nothing if you knew how to move. She moved, not backward, not to the side, forward. The crowd gasped. No prey ran toward a Vornkai. It was against every law of nature. Every instinct in the universe said to run away from those claws, those teeth, that mountain of muscle and death. Elena ran straight at him. Kethmaros' claws cut through the air where she had been a moment before, but she was not there anymore. She had dropped low, sliding under his arms, rolling across the sand, coming up behind him. He spun around, all 4 arms slashing in a circle of death. She bent backward, her spine curving in a way that made the aliens in the crowd cry out in surprise. One claw passed so close to her face that it cut a strand of her hair. She did not stop moving. She could not stop moving. If she stopped, she was dead. Kethmaros attacked again and again. He was fast and strong and deadly, but Elena was something he had never faced before. She was water flowing around rocks. She was smoke slipping through fingers. She was everywhere and nowhere at once. She took hits. A claw opened a cut across her ribs. A fist slammed into her shoulder with enough force to dislocate it. She felt bones crack. She felt blood run down her skin. She did not stop. The crowd had gone silent. They had expected a quick death. They had expected the human to fall in the first seconds. Instead, they were watching something impossible. They were watching a human refuse to die. Telesfori leaned forward in his seat, his tendrils twitching with confusion. His assistant had stopped placing bets. They were both staring at the arena with expressions of disbelief. "What is happening?" the assistant whispered. Telesfori did not answer. He was watching the human's face. Even as she bled, even as her bones broke, she was smiling. Why was she smiling? Blood dripped onto the white sand, turning it red. Elena's blood. It ran from the cut on her ribs, from the wounds on her arms, from a gash above her eye that made her blink to keep the blood out of her vision. Her left shoulder hung at a wrong angle, dislocated from the impact of Kethmaros' fist. She was still standing. Kethmaros circled her slowly, his 4 yellow eyes studying her with growing confusion. He had hit her at least a dozen times. Any other creature would be dead or begging for mercy, but this human kept moving, kept fighting, kept smiling that strange, terrible smile. "Why do you not fall?" he growled. Elena spat blood onto the sand. "Because I am not finished." She reached up with her right hand, grabbed her dislocated left shoulder, and pushed. There was a wet popping sound as the bone slid back into place. The pain must have been incredible. Some aliens in the crowd fainted. Others turned away, unable to watch. Elena rolled her shoulder once, testing it, and raised her fists again. The arena was completely silent now. Every alien in that massive stadium was staring at her with expressions that ranged from horror to fascination. They had never seen anything like this. Pain was supposed to stop creatures. Pain was the body's way of saying stop, surrender, give up. Every species in the galaxy understood this basic law of nature. Humans apparently did not. In the stands, Telosivri had pulled out a data pad. His tendrils moved rapidly as he searched through files about humanity. He needed to understand what he was seeing. There had to be an explanation. He found the file labeled Earth Species Homo sapiens and began reading. His eyes moved faster and faster as the words appeared on his screen. Persistence hunters, he whispered. They were persistence hunters. His assistant leaned closer. What does that mean? Telosivri's voice was shaking now. Their ancestors did not hunt with claws or fangs. They were too weak for that. Instead, they chased their prey. They walked after animals for hours, for days, across entire continents. They never stopped. They never rested. They just kept coming, kept following, until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. He continued reading. They developed the ability to sweat, which allowed them to cool their bodies while running. Most animals cannot do this. So humans would chase prey under the hot sun until the animal overheated and died. They literally walked things to death. The assistant made a sound of disbelief. That is impossible. There is more, Telosivri said. His tendrils had gone pale, which meant he was afraid. Their bodies produce chemicals that block pain during moments of extreme stress. They can continue fighting with injuries that should make movement impossible. They break their own bones to keep going. He looked up at the arena, at the bleeding human who had just reset her own shoulder without hesitation. They do not know how to quit, he whispered. It is not in their biology. They literally cannot stop. In the arena, Elena moved forward. She was not fast anymore. Her injuries had slowed her down, but she did not need to be fast. She needed to survive. She needed to keep moving until Keth Maros made a mistake. The Vornkai attacked again, all four arms slashing at once. Elena dodged two of the strikes, blocked one with her forearm, and took the fourth across her back. New blood joined the old blood. New pain joined the old pain. She kept moving. Keth Maros was breathing heavily now. His attacks were becoming slower, less precise. The Vornkai were ambush predators. They evolved to kill quickly, to end fights in seconds. They had never needed endurance. They had never faced prey that refused to die. Elena saw her opening. She moved inside his guard, too close for his claws to be effective, and drove her fist into his throat. The impact was not powerful by Vornkai standards. Her small human hand against his massive neck should have done nothing, but she knew anatomy. She knew weak points. She hit him exactly where his breathing tube met his voice box. Keth Maros staggered backward, gasping for air. For the first time in the fight, he felt fear. The crowd erupted in shocked noise. Aliens who had been laughing at the human were now standing up, pressing against the barriers, trying to see better. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years sat together in shared amazement. Something impossible was happening. The Chiric's ambassador watched with all of his eyes. He finally understood what had always bothered him about humans. It was not their weakness. It was the suspicion, buried deep in his instincts, that the weakness was a lie. That behind those soft bodies and gentle faces was something ancient and terrible. His ancestors had a name for creatures like humans. They called them the ones who do not stop. His people had believed they were just myths, stories told to frighten children. They were not myths. They were standing in the arena right now, covered in blood, still fighting. Elena pressed her advantage. She moved forward with strikes to Keth Maros's body, targeting the same weak points over and over. Each blow was small. Each blow was nothing compared to his strength. But they added up. Damage built upon damage. Pain built upon pain. How? Keth Maros gasped. How are you still standing? Elena answered him with her actions, not her words. She ducked under a desperate swing and drove her elbow into his side. She felt ribs crack under the impact. Not her ribs this time. His. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the weak and helpless human, made the apex predator bleed. Kethmaros roared in frustration and grabbed her with two of his arms, his hands wrapped completely around her body. He began to squeeze, trying to crush her like he had crushed so many others before. Elena felt her ribs bending. She felt the air being pushed from her lungs. Any normal creature would have panicked. Any normal creature would have screamed and begged for release. Elena looked up at Kethmaros's face and smiled again. Then she drove her thumbs into his eyes. He screamed. He dropped her. He stumbled backward with his hands pressed against his damaged face. Elena landed on the sand and stood up immediately. Her body was a wreck of pain and blood and broken things. But she was still standing. She would always be standing. Talos Free dropped his datapad. His assistant was crying, though he did not know why. All around them, aliens who had never agreed on anything were united in a single emotion: terror. They were watching a monster, they realized. Not the Vornkai, the human, the small, weak, fragile human who had taken everything the galaxy's deadliest predator could give and was still coming for more. And she was not finished yet. 20 minutes had passed since the fight began. The white sand of the arena was now painted red with blood from both fighters. The air smelled like copper and sweat and fear. And for the first time in his life, Kethmaros, the Death Singer, knew what it meant to be prey. His breathing was heavy and rough. His forearms hung at his sides, too tired to lift. Two of his eyes were damaged and swollen shut from Elena's attack. His ribs ached where she had struck him again and again. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. He had never fought for this long. His species never needed to fight for this long. They were ambush predators, built for quick kills and explosive violence. A Vornkai hunt lasted seconds, not minutes. This was not how combat was supposed to work. But the human would not stop. Elena was in worse condition than him. That was obvious to everyone watching. She had 3 broken ribs that made every breath painful. Her left eye was swollen shut from a blow that had fractured her eye socket. Deep cuts covered her arms and body. She had lost so much blood that the medical scanners in the arena showed she should be unconscious. She was still standing, still moving, still coming forward. The crowd had changed during those 20 minutes. At the beginning, they had cheered for Kethmaros. They had laughed at the human. Now they sat in silence. Some covered their eyes but could not look away. Others held on to each other, regardless of species or old hatred. They were watching something that went against every law of nature they understood. Elena walked toward Kethmaros with slow, steady steps. She did not run anymore. She did not need to run. She just needed to keep moving forward. "You know what my people did before we reached the star?" she said. Her voice was calm, almost friendly despite her injuries. "We hunted, but not like your people hunt. We did not have claws or fangs or strength. So we learned to do something different." Kethmaros tried to attack her. He swung one of his arms in a weak slash. Elena stepped around it easily. He was too slow now, too tired. "We would find an animal," she continued. "A deer, maybe, or an antelope. Something fast, something that could outrun us easily." She ducked under another tired swing. "And we would start walking after it." Kethmaros backed away. He was retreating. The greatest warrior of the Vornkai, the killer of 47 champions, was running from a creature half his size. Elena did not let him go. She followed. The animal would run away, of course. It was faster than us. It would disappear over a hill or into a forest. But we did not stop. We kept walking. We followed the tracks. We followed the smell. We just kept coming. She struck him in the side, her fist hitting the same cracked ribs. Kethmaros grunted in pain. Eventually, the animal would get tired. It would stop to rest. But then it would see us coming over the hill, still walking, always walking, so it would run again. Another strike, another grunt of pain. This would go on for hours, sometimes days. The animal would run and rest. But we never rested. We never stopped. We just kept walking. And eventually, she moved closer, inside his weak defenses, and drove her knee into his stomach. Eventually, the animal could not run anymore. It would just stand there, too tired to move, too tired to fight, and we would walk up to it and kill it with our bare hands. Kethmaros fell to one knee, his forearms pressed against the bloody sand, trying to hold himself up. His remaining good eyes looked up at Elena with an emotion he had never felt before. Fear. That is what humans are, Elena said softly. We are the thing that never stops coming. We are the nightmare that follows you no matter how far you run. We are patient. We are relentless. And we never, ever give up. She grabbed one of his arms and twisted. The joint made a horrible cracking sound. Kethmaros screamed. In the stands, species that had warred for 10,000 years sat together in stunned silence. The Quelith ambassador had stopped breathing. The Chiric's ambassador was making a clicking sound that his species only made when facing extinction-level threats. Even the Morveth, who had left earlier, was watching through remote cameras. Her tank had stopped moving. She could not look away. Kethmaros tried to stand. Elena let him. Then she tackled him to the ground. The fight became something primitive, something ancient. Elena forgot about technique and strategy. She became the animal her ancestors had been on the plains of Earth 50,000 years ago. She fought with teeth and elbows and knees and forehead. She used every part of her body as a weapon. Kethmaros tried to fight back. He was still stronger than her. He still had claws and teeth and 3 working arms. But he was tired. So tired. And every time he pushed her away, she came right back. Every time he knocked her down, she got back up. She always got back up. Blood covered both of them now. Some of it was red. Some of it was the dark purple of Vornkai blood. The sand beneath them had turned into mud. The aliens in the crowd began to understand something. They were not watching a fight between a predator and prey. They were watching a fight between 2 predators. And the human was winning. Kethmaros managed to throw Elena off him. She hit the ground hard and rolled. For a moment, she did not move. The crowd held its breath. Was it over? Had the human finally fallen? Then she began to push herself up. Slowly, painfully, but surely. She stood. Kethmaros made a sound that might have been a sob. He had given everything he had. He had used every technique, every ounce of strength, every trick he had learned in a lifetime of combat, and still she stood. What do you do when the thing you are fighting cannot be stopped? What do you do when death itself refuses to die? You give up. For the first time in his life, Kethmaros wanted to run. He wanted to flee from this arena, from this creature, from this nightmare that wore the face of a small human female. But there was nowhere to run. And even if there was, he knew she would follow. She would always follow. Elena smiled. Her teeth were red with blood. Her eyes were empty of everything except determination. Still standing, she whispered. I am still standing, and I will be standing when you fall. She walked toward him again. The end came not with a mighty blow, but with a simple truth. Kethmaros lay on his back in the bloody sand. His forearms were spread out like a broken star. His chest rose and fell with painful, ragged breaths. 2 of his eyes were swollen shut. One arm hung at a wrong angle. His entire body was covered in cuts and bruises. Elena sat on his chest, her knees pinning his upper arms to the ground. Her hands were wrapped around his throat. She was too weak to crush his windpipe. She was too tired to do much of anything. But she did not need strength anymore. She just needed to hold on. Kethmaros could have thrown her off. Even now, even in his broken state, he was physically stronger than her. But something had changed during the fight. Something inside him had shattered more completely than any bone. His will was gone. For his entire life, Kethmaros had believed he was the ultimate predator. He had killed creatures from dozens of species. He had never faced anything that could match him. And then this human, this tiny fragile creature from a small planet called Earth, had shown him what a real predator looked like. He had fought with claws and strength. She had fought with something deeper, something that went beyond muscle and bone, something that came from the soul. Yield, Elena whispered. Her voice was barely louder than a breath. Yield and live. The arena was silent. Millions of aliens waited for Kethmaros' answer. Millions more watched through screens across the galaxy. This moment would be remembered for 1,000 years. Kethmaros looked up at the human above him. Blood dripped from her face onto his. Her eyes were calm and steady. the eyes of someone who had made peace with death long ago. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you fight like this? You could have died. You should have died. Why?" Elena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her words were soft but clear. "Because that is what humans do. We fight, we break, we get back up, and we never stop coming. Not for our homes, not for our people, not for ourselves. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the smartest. But we are the species that does not quit." She leaned closer. "Now yield. I do not want to kill you, but I will if I must." Kethmaris closed his remaining eyes. A sound came from his throat, somewhere between a sigh and a sob. "I yield." The words echoed through the arena. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then the crowd exploded. It was not cheering, it was chaos. Aliens screamed and shouted in 100 different languages. Some wept, some laughed with a strange madness, some simply stared at the arena with expressions of total disbelief. The greatest warrior of the most feared species in the galaxy had just surrendered to a human, a creature with no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. Everything they believed about the universe had just changed. Elena released Kethmaris' throat and rolled off him. She lay on her back in the bloody sand, looking up at the lights of the arena. She could not feel most of her body anymore. The pain had become a distant thing, like a storm on the horizon. But she was alive, and her people were safe. Human medics rushed into the arena. They had been waiting at the gate, expecting to collect a body. Instead, they found their commander lying in a pool of blood, laughing weakly. "Did someone record that?" she asked as they lifted her onto a stretcher. "My nephew is never going to believe this." In the stands, Ambassador Telosivri sat completely still. His tendrils had gone white with shock. His mind was racing through the implications of what he had just witnessed. For years, his species had been planning to expand into human territory. They had believed humans would be easy prey. They had believed they could take whatever they wanted from these weak, soft creatures. That plan was dead now. Anyone who tried to conquer humanity would face millions of fighters like Elena Vasquez. Millions of creatures who could not be stopped by pain or fear or death itself. The Quel'Th would not be expanding into human space. Ever. Similar thoughts were running through the minds of 100 other species. Plans for conquest were being deleted. Threats were being reconsidered. A new equation was being written in the minds of the galaxy's leaders. Do not make enemies of the humans. The Galactic Concord met that evening to vote on humanity's membership. The vote was supposed to take hours. Different species had different concerns and different demands. Normally, a new species would spend years in negotiations before being accepted. The vote took 5 minutes. It was unanimous. Humanity was now a member of the Galactic Concord with all rights and protections that came with that status. Their colony on Kepler 442b was recognized as legitimate. No species would threaten them. No species dared. In the medical bay, Elena floated in a healing tank filled with blue liquid. Machines worked to repair her broken body. The doctors said she would need weeks to fully recover. She had 3 broken ribs, a fractured skull, a torn shoulder, and more cuts than they could count. By every medical standard, she should have died in that arena. She had not died. She had won. Telosivri came to visit her. He stood outside the tank, looking at the small human floating inside. "I need to understand," he said. "Why did you fight like that? You could have died. You almost did die. Why refuse weapons? Why take so much damage?" Elena opened her eyes. Through the blue liquid, her gaze found his. "Because that is who we are," she said. Her voice was transmitted through speakers on the tank. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every day. Ice ages, predators, disease, disasters, and we survived all of it. Not because we were strong, because we refused to give up." She smiled a small, tired smile. "Every human carries that history in their blood. Every one of us is descended from survivors, from people who kept going when everything said they should stop. That is our gift and our curse. We do not know how to quit." Telosivri was quiet for a long time. Then he made a formal bow, a gesture of deep respect among his people. "I came here thinking humans were the weakest species in the galaxy," he said. I was wrong. You might be the most dangerous. Elena laughed. It hurt her broken ribs, but she laughed anyway. We are not dangerous, she said. Not to our friends, but to our enemies. She looked at him with those calm, steady eyes. To our enemies, we are endless. 6 months later, the Vorn Kai petitioned for a formal alliance with humanity. Keth Maros, his scars now symbols of honor rather than shame, became humanity's most vocal advocate among the alien species. When asked why, he would show his scars and say, I have hunted across 100 worlds. I have killed the deadliest creatures in the galaxy. But I have never faced anything like that human. If they are our enemies, we are extinct. If they are our allies, he would pause, and something like pride would cross his alien face. If they are our allies, then together we can face anything. And across the galaxy, species that had never feared anything began to sleep a little less easily. Because somewhere out there, on a small blue planet called Earth, millions of humans were living their lives. They were doctors and teachers and farmers and soldiers. They were kind and gentle and loving. But deep in their DNA, in the ancient memory of their species, they carried the truth that Elena had shown the galaxy. They were the ones who did not stop, and they never would.